Good morning, everyone, and welcome into Wake and Take. It's your boy Jason, and we've got some football to talk about today. Today, we're actually going to talk about some TV football as Netflix has released their receiver TV series following four receivers and a tight end throughout last season. Pretty cool guys. Davante Adams, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle are all followed in this series. I've only watched a couple episodes so far. It's pretty damn good, though. Some great television, so recommend it. I decided this morning, as it's kind of a trending show right now, why don't we go through these players and see if we should be buying or selling them in fantasy football. So go ahead, take out your coffee, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All right, so welcome in, everyone. Rubio, Ryan, thanks for popping into the chat. If you guys hear any music or bass or something coming from the background, again, a few weeks ago, I talked about this. Well, my neighbor is just sitting in the parking lot with his doors open, in his car, with his doors open, his trunk open, just blasting music through his subwoofer for some reason for the entire apartment complex to hear. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I never will. But it's happening again. So I apologize if you hear some random music and loud bass throughout my microphone. Hopefully you don't. I mean, hopefully you don't. But if you do, that's why. I do. I can hear it right now, and it's kind of annoying. But what isn't annoying is this TV show. It has been pretty interesting. Like I said, I'm only a couple episodes in, but it's just kind of cool to see, as was the quarterback series last year, just to see what's going on with these players, not only on the football field, but off the football field throughout the season. Very, very cool series, very insightful. And yeah, I highly, highly recommend checking it out. But that's not what we're here for today. We're not here to talk about the series as good as it is. We are here to talk fantasy football, and we'll start things off with Davante Adams. Davante Adams is, of course, featured in this show. Davante Adams right now has an ADP of wide receiver 14, and his dynasty value is actually wide receiver 35 on keep trade cut. Last year, in terms of points per game, he actually finished as the 15th wide receiver on a points per game basis, averaging 15.6 points per game. And he finished as the wide receiver 10 through 17 games. And fun fact, this was the only receiver in this entire show that played the entire 17 games in the regular season. Pretty cool for him. Ended up finishing again as the wide receiver 10. Now, after that finish, we have him ranked here at PlayerProfiler as the wide receiver 17 heading into the year, which honestly, as I've said a lot this offseason, it makes Davante Adams a buy. And for any of you that have not tuned into the receiver series, this is a picture of Max Crosby, but they refer to each other as twin. That was something I learned. They call each other twin. Max calls him twin. Davante calls him twin. They say that they're very much on the same wavelength. There was they wore the same outfit to the game last year and the same outfit to a game the year before. Totally unplanned. Just some very, a like-minded individual. So I thought it'd be kind of funny to throw this in there as his little profile picture. But anyway, am I buying Davante Adams? Yeah, I've said it before. I'll say it again. In fact, I drafted Davante Adams in the Scott Fish Bowl. I love his value right now for really a plethora of reasons, right? Again, finished as a wide receiver 10 last year, and you can get him as a wide receiver 17. But even in Dynasty as the wide receiver 35, if I'm a win now team, that is a very, very easy button to press for me to try to go trade for him because he's only 31 and has not shown any signs of slowing down. He still finished last year with over 100 receptions, still had over 1,000 receiving yards, and still had 8 touchdowns, which is a very, very respectable season. And I mean, even the year before, he had less receptions, but 400 more yards and 14 touchdowns with Derek Carr as his quarterback and actually averaged the 5th most points per game. So genuinely has shown no signs of slowing down. And really the only reason last year was disappointing, and I'm putting quotes around it because, again, 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns is not a bad season. But it was disappointing because of Aiden O'Connell. It was disappointing because of Jimmy Garoppolo. They just were not good on a consistent enough basis. And there were a lot of times that, he just wasn't targeted at the right time. We remember there was even that one game, who was it? I think they had was it Preston Smith covering him? They had one of the teams had literally a defensive lineman covering Davante Adams last year for one play. And even then, Davante Adams didn't get targeted. It was really, really weird. And then when he did get targeted, it was not good. He actually ranked 66th in target quality rating last year and 69th in catchable target rate, which leads him to have the most unrealized air yards last season. Last year, he had over 1,000 unrealized air yards, which is just insane. That's a lot of yards left on the table, especially since he already had 1896 air yards throughout the season. Like he like that's a lot. That is a lot of unrealized air yards. And he actually had a 44% air yard share, which is massive. That was also the highest in the league. A 33% target share, 31% target rate. But those target quality was terrible, and they were not very catchable targets. So that's why if you look at his game log, he had 2 games last year, guys. 2 games last year where he had 20 or more targets. How often do you hear about that in an NFL career, let alone twice in the same season? So Davante Adams is clearly still a wide receiver that the Raiders want to heavily use. He's still one of the more talented receivers in the league, and you can get him at an extreme discount right now. Davante Adams is a buy in both Dynasty. He's worth drafting and redraft at his current ADP, and I'm really all over him. Like I've said before, I don't understand, like, for example, why Tyreek Hill is like the wide receiver 12 in Dynasty and the wide receiver 2 in redraft, when Davante Adams has just as high of a ceiling as him, if not better, especially in PPR leagues. So either way, let's go Davante Adams. Let's get him on our rosters, as the Raiders didn't really add much to the receiving room. I know they added Brock Bowers, right? But that's really that's not going to take too much from Davante. If anything, that's going to take stuff away from Jacoby Myers and Michael Mayer. So I'm still expecting Davante Adams to be, I mean, he was 3rd in the NFL in targets last year, 2nd in the NFL in targets last year with 175. I don't expect much of that to change. I want this player. In fact, I'm expecting the Raiders offense to be even better with Gardner Minshew at the helm next year. So I'm in. Give me some Davante Adams. We'll go ahead and move on to the next player. Let's do Deebo Samuel. As you guys know, Deebo Samuel is one of my favorite players in the entire league because he's awesome to watch. Really, he is one of the more pure football players to me. Just the fact that he runs into contact and breaks those tackles, takes screens to the house, that's the type of stuff I love. I mean, I just love it when man run man over. That's awesome. I love it. And Deebo Samuel is probably the best at that in the league, maybe outside of like Derrick Henry, which is wild to say, given Deebo Samuel is a wide receiver, like probably, I don't know the exact height and weight of Derrick Henry off the top of my head, but probably like 3-4 inches shorter than Derrick Henry. And I want to say like 30 pounds lighter. And yet this dude is an absolute semi-truck running through tackles. So Deebo Samuel is a guy I love to watch. I am back and forth when it comes to his fantasy value. Right now, he has an ADP of wide receiver 16, a dynasty value of wide receiver 30, after coming off a wide receiver 15 finish in only 15 games, and averaged the 12th highest points per game at 16.3. So obviously, he's still very, very good as a fantasy producer. However, a lot of it does come from just a few weeks, as he really did come to life over a 3-week span last season. He had 36 points against the Eagles, 34 points against the Seahawks, and 22 points against the Arizona Cardinals week 13, 14, and 15. Otherwise, he only had 3 other 20-point games. Most of his games were over 10 points, but he did have some stinkers, as we've come to expect from the San Francisco 49ers. Last year, the San Francisco 49ers were dead last in the league in pass attempts. So there's not a lot of volume to go around, and that's genuinely why people like to fade the receivers on the 49ers pass offense. However, even though they were last in pass attempts, they were easily the most efficient offense in the entire NFL. They had the 32nd in pass attempts, but still finished top 5 in both pass yards and passing touchdowns. In fact, 4th in pass yards and 2nd in passing touchdowns last season. An incredibly efficient passing offense in San Francisco, which leads Deebo Samuel to still be able to have spike weeks here and there, and especially has this massive contingent upside if even one of the weapons goes away. One thing that's seriously hurt Deebo Samuel over the last couple seasons has been the arrival of Christian McCaffrey. We saw last year that Deebo Samuel only had two games with 5 carries, and not a single game with more than 5 carries last year, which is just not very Deebo Samuel-like. I mean, I know that he's kind of not wanting to do that, and that was kind of a big part of his contract negotiations, was like, if you want me to use me as a running back, and then you want to pay me a little bit more too, as you know, I am taking on a little bit more of an injury risk with that role. So, they've kind of faded him out of that, but still, like, they're still obviously utilizing him on screens. They're still letting him run every once in a while. And I mean, they're still utilizing him as a regular old route runner as well. He's just not very good at it. In fact, he was 66th in route win rate last year. And against man coverage, only won his route 24% of the time, which was 114th in the league. So he struggles at route running and separation. He's just incredible after the catch. For example, he was 32nd in receiving yards, but 9th in receiving yards after the catch. That just shows how good he is after the catch. We all know it. It's not like I really had to explain it, but he is really one of the most explosive players with the ball in his hand. What is giving me some pause at paying up for his price right now is just the fact that we have no idea what's going on with Brandon Ayuk. And I think if Brandon Ayuk comes back, then it's obviously, again, still very crowded. But then also the 49ers do have an out on his contract after this season. So they could either take that and let him walk, as it's a pretty high dead cap that they would have, a pretty high base salary that they would incur if he were to be on the team next year. So they could just cut him, or they could do something kind of similar to the Stephon Diggs situation in Buffalo, where, they trade him, maybe not for a ton, and the other team kind of takes on the contract and try to kind of get like a 1-year rental out of Deebo Samuel, which is totally possible. But I think I would want to wait to buy into him if that happened, just to kind of, I want to know where he would go. I mean, I do think whoever trades for him, if that happens, or, signs him in free agency, would of course want to heavily use him, but he is going to be 29 years old in the next football season. So we'll have to see. But I think my big thing here is just the fact that when you're in this wide receiver like 19 range, as Deebo Samuel is, there's just so many different options that you could take that I just don't know if I necessarily want the risk on this type of player as much as I like him, because his range of outcomes is massive. Again, in 2021, even, he had 1,400 receiving yards, which was just incredible. He was actually third in points per game with 21.2, but then he followed up that season with less than half of that receiving yards and only 13 points per game, which was 28th in the league. So it's just very, very boom or bust with this guy, as much as I love him. So I think it's... I would be more inclined to buy him in Dynasty. I think in Redraft, there's some better options around that range in that round, whether it be like a Saquon Barkley if you want to go the running back route, or, like a Nico Collins, a Cooper Kupp, or something like that. I think you just have a little bit higher of a ceiling, at least in terms of season production. Now, I do, of course, understand Deebo Samuel probably has the highest upside on a week-to-week basis. And so that's why I do say in Dynasty, I'm a little intrigued at the wide receiver 30 price tag on Keep Trade Cut. That's not too bad. Like, if you could take... Man, I don't, it's tough. But I mean, I wouldn't mind taking Brandon Ayuk, for example, for Deebo Samuel and seeing what plus I could get on top. Maybe like a Jaden Reed to Deebo Samuel trade could be interesting. Maybe a Jordan Addison for a Deebo plus. I think those are some interesting moves to me. But for the most part, along the wide receivers in this range just simply have higher receiving upside than Deebo Samuel. With Christian McCaffrey still there, Deebo doesn't really have much of his rushing upside anymore either. It really does take those big breakaway plays, which of course happen. I'm not betting against Deebo Samuel for that to happen. But Deebo, like, I don't know. It's too give or take for me to want him at his wide receiver 19 seasonal ranking, wide receiver 16 ADP. Senior Football says, isn't Barkley going at the 1-2 turn, Deebo going at like the 2-3 turn? It's varied for me. For the most part, in every underdog draft I've been in, Barkley's gone at the 2-3 turn, and Deebo's kind of gone in the middle of the third. Like, Saquon is genuinely going before Deebo, but I'm just kind of saying in that range. I haven't seen Barkley go in the first round yet. I've got him a few times in the late second, a few times in the third. Is kind of where I'm at with Deebo, or at least in terms of what I've seen in my underdog drafts. But every room's different. So we'll see. But anyway. That is the Deebo stuff. I would say, in redraft, I guess. Like, it's like, if you have a 49ers build, I guess you could go ahead and take Deebo Samuel. But for the most part, I think there's going to be some better options at his cost, even if I love him. even if I love him. The next player is, we'll just go ahead and stay with the 49ers, right? We're talking about George Kittle. This is the tight end that's actually featured on this, and it's very, very cool that they brought in a tight end, and especially one as likable as George Kittle. Last year, he finished as the tight end 5 in 16 games. He averaged 12.7 points per game, which was 6th in the league, and right now carries an ADP of tight end 7 and a dynasty value of tight end 10. He is 30 years old, but he's just got athleticism for days and has been one of the most consistent producers at the tight end position. In fact, every year since 2018, he has been top 6 in points per game or better. And the only reason I say top 6 is because he was 6 last year. He's actually been top 5 in all the other seasons. He's just been incredible. Last season, he had 1,000 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. His third best season. Maybe second, but his third best season in terms of receiving yards. He's had 3,000 yard seasons, but either way, really, really good. And that came in a year where pretty much everyone stayed healthy. Christian McCaffrey was still out there a lot. Deebo was still out there a lot. Brandon Ayuk was still out there a lot. And George Kittle was able to carve a 21% target share out, which was 7th amongst tight ends, which is just really, really good. And he actually found himself kind of killing it in the air yards department. He was 3rd in air yards, finished with the most receiving yards amongst tight ends, and 3rd most yards after the catch. And when you look at his efficiency metrics, we remember how much we love George Kittle. He's 1st in yards per route run, 1st in yards per target, 1st in yards per reception, 1st in yards per team pass attempt, 1st in EPA. Those are all the metrics that you love to see from a tight end, and especially one that, is very, very boomer bust, with those boom weeks are so huge for George Kittle. He had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games last year with 15 or more points. 1, 2, 3, 4 of those were over 20 points. That is awesome. You love seeing that type of ceiling. He even had a 3 touchdown week, which is just incredible. George Kittle, despite being in an offense that relies on efficiency, is still someone worth buying in both redraft and dynasty, as tight ends age gracefully. And George Kittle is one that is always a focal point of this 49ers offense, at least over the course of the season. Again, he's going to have some of those, 1 reception for 9-yard weeks, but he's also going to have those, 5, 6 receptions for multiple touchdowns and over 100 yards. I mean, he's incredible after the catch, just like Deebo Samuel. And he gets dirty as well. One of the better blocking tight ends in the league, too. Either way, he's going to be out there. He's going to be catching passes. He's going to be scoring touchdowns. And he's going to perform right around his value pretty easily. Again, finishes the tight end 5 last year. Has a tight end 7 valuation in terms of redraft ADP. That's enough room to grow. And he's actually, I usually see him slip a little bit in drafts. Not too much. But, you can usually get him a little bit after ADP. And that's definitely a case where I'm pressing that button. Love myself some George Kittle. I really, really do. I know that he's lost some weight this offseason, but I mean, he's just such a workhorse and a hard worker in general that I do think he'll be able to add that weight back and be George Kittle, at least by like week 4 or so. So George Kittle is someone I'm in on at his price in both dynasty and redraft. The next player we'll go ahead and talk about is Amon-Ra St. Brown, the sun god himself. Right now, carries an ADP of wide receiver 5, a dynasty value of wide receiver 4, and is coming off a wide receiver 3 finish where he averaged the 4th highest points per game with 20.7. Amon-Ra St. Brown is probably the best possession slot receiver in the entire league. He finished last year with 1,500 receiving yards and 10 receiving touchdowns. The year before that at over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. And in his rookie season, almost cracked 1,000 yards despite only having 4th-round draft capital. One of the hardest workers in the league, and is just commanding targets on one of the highest pass volume teams in the league. Last year, Jared Goff had over 600 pass attempts and finished 2nd in pass yards. There is so much volume on this Detroit Lions offense, and Amon-Ra St. Brown is the biggest part of that. Last year, he had a 30% target share and finished with the 2nd most receptions in the entire NFL. So it's just awesome. He really, really is just awesome. And if you look at his, just his route running, he's 5th in total route wins, 3rd in routes versus man, 5th in win rate versus man, 9th in target rate versus man. And against zone, he was really, really good as well. just Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's the sun god. I don't know how much longer I have to go on to say that. He's an absolute stud. Am I buying him? It really depends. I mean, yes, I'm drafting him if he's sitting there at ADP in redraft. That's how I'm going to answer that question. In Dynasty, though, am I going up to trade for him as the wide receiver 4? Yes and no. Yes and no. It depends on what the price tag is. I will 100% not be doing one of those like massive overpays for an Amon-Ra St. Brown where it's like, oh, I'm going to give you one like my quarterback 2, and then I'm also going to give you my running back 1, and then I'm going to give you my wide receiver 2, and you know what, I'll also throw in a first-round draft pick. Like, I don't want to do one of those massive packages for Amon-Ra St. Brown, but if I could keep it clean, like if I can take a Garrett Wilson, a Puka Nacua, a Malik Neighbors, a Tyreek Hill, and see what I could add on top to get into Amon-Ra, that's where I'm at. I want to use a player, a wide receiver pretty close to him and try to tier up to Amon-Ra more so than try to kind of send the whole farm to get him, if that makes any sense. I know generally those like sending the whole farm trades rarely even come off. But with Amon-Ra, that's kind of where I'm at. I would rather use another wide receiver in his range to tier up that has similar enough value to where I'm not adding too much, like Puka and a second. I mean, it might have to be a first depending on your league, but still, like that's the range I'm at. Down to Tyreek Hill. I would love if you could take Tyreek Hill in a first to get Amon-Ra. That's amazing stuff. And it's probably not too far out of the realm. You might have to add a little bit more, but that's basically where I'm at with him. I'm drafting him in redraft, and then I will be sort of buying him in Dynasty. I'm only trying to tier up into him. I don't necessarily want to use, I don't want to give like DJ Moore, Ramondre Stevenson, and Will Levis, right? Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I want to keep my pieces, but if I can get into them off of just one other wide receiver in his range, then let's do it. Then that's where I'm at. So again, that's like Puka, Garrett Wilson, Malik Neighbors, Tyreek Hill, maybe Chris Olave, like those guys. See what you can add on top to get into them. Which leads us to our final wide receiver of the show, Justin Jefferson, who's actually just one of my biggest buys in Dynasty right now. I'll go ahead and say it. Even at he still has brought himself up to the Dynasty wide receiver 1 on keep trade cut, but that's not genuinely what I'm seeing in terms of people who roster Justin Jefferson. For the most part, he's hitting the trade block, which just does not happen for wide receivers of Justin Jefferson's caliber. When that happens, it means you have to try your damnedest to buy this player. He's coming off a wide receiver 33 finish, but that's not really fair to say as he only played 10 games. He was actually 5th in points per game in those 10 games he played, averaging over 20 points per game. Right now carries an ADP of wide receiver 4, which is also Player Profiler's seasonal ranking, wide receiver 4. He's coming off a 1,000-yard, 5-touchdown season in only 10 games and has the record for most receiving yards in a receiver's first 3 seasons with 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. But yeah, before that, back-to-back 1,600-plus yard seasons. Justin Jefferson, just an absolute stud. Kills it in every metric. Target share, air yards, receptions, everything. Justin Jefferson, true stud, worthy of the wide receiver 1 price tag. But because of the quarterback uncertainty, it's a lot closer and attainable than it has been in the past. So I am trying to buy him. Without Kirk Cousins, we can expect the volume to drop a little bit, as well as the quality of targets. But I don't think we should be dropping it as far as some are suggesting. Last year, we saw Joshua Dobbs, Nick Mullins, and Jaren Hall all be pretty successful in their opportunities. Dobbs, of course, ended up getting benched, but I mean, you remembered the Dobbs sanity. We were going insane for that player. And so I expect Sam Darnold to at least be kind of good, and I expect J.J. McCarthy to at least be pretty good when he comes in at some point. And especially with those 2 quarterbacks, they are not good enough to spread the ball around. Neither of them are. I love J.J. McCarthy, but he is kind of a 1-2 read guy, and that's why I'm very, very much in on Justin Jefferson and very, very much in on T.J. Hawkinson, and a little bit fading of Jordan Addison, as I don't see Addison getting as much volume as we want him to get for his current price tag, because I expect Justin Jefferson especially to just be force-fed by these quarterbacks, as we've seen historically from Darnold, and as I'm going to expect from J.J. McCarthy, as for the most part, it was Roman Wilson in Michigan getting a lot of the targets and some out of the backfield. But either way, I expect Justin Jefferson to, of course, be a focal point, if not the focal point. I wouldn't even be surprised if he set a career target record this season. That's how much I'm expecting him to be force-fed, especially with TJ Hawkinson likely not 100%. I think that helps Justin Jefferson just as much as it does TJ Hawkinson. Justin Jefferson doesn't care if there are even 4 people covering him. He will still get open and he'll still score touchdowns. Literally the best wide receiver in the league. Total stud. Buying him in redraft, buying him in Dynasty. Give me Jay Jettas wherever you can. That should do it. That is all 5 players in the Netflix Receiver TV show. Again, highly recommend checking it out. It is very, very cool. Let's go ahead and hop into the chat, see if we have any questions. Yesterday, Ryan traded for Dobbs in a Superflex Dynasty League last year. A lot of people were doing it. It's okay. Would you guys trade ETN and Pittman for Bijan on a full PPR Dynasty team? Ooh, I don't think so. Especially that you said last year you went 13-1 and unluckily faced against Amari Cooper in the second week of playoffs. If your team, it just doesn't sound like your team needs to make a change. I think ETN is gearing up for a really solid season and Pittman's still really good as well. I mean, it's not a bad trade. Like, I'm not going to be like, definitely don't do it, but I am leaning no. I think that you should probably keep your core together since it sounds like a really good team. You went 13-1 last year. I don't think you need to be changing too much, really. And I don't know if the upgrade from ETN to Bijan, as good of an upgrade as it is worth giving up a receiver like Michael Pittman. Is Ayuk going to be better than Deebo this year? I mean, he might have more receiving yards, but I think Deebo will be the better fantasy asset. All right. That should do it. You guys, thank you, as always, for tuning in. This was another very fun episode of Wake and Take, and you guys were a great audience, as always. Go buy Davante Adams. Go buy Justin Jefferson. Go buy Amon-Ra St. Brown, kind of. Go get some George Kittle, kind of, and go get some Deebo Samuel, kind of. You all have a terrific Thursday, wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you all tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern, on the Player Profiler, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Don't forget to hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe. Have a good one. Peace.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.